sometimes you need to get yourself so excited about what you're going for that you're willing to take the leap. And not getting excited is a practice of safety. So that's a good example of how you're not using that emotion that's necessary for you to do the thing. Because if you get excited enough, you're going to be willing to do things that you wouldn't normally be willing to do. But some people don't let them get themselves excited. And then they're scared that if they get excited, they'll do something stupid, and maybe you will, but you have to be willing to take that risk. You have to be willing to look like an idiot or feel like an idiot to a lot of time take the leap that you need to take.
This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte.
Identifying your blocks and demystifying your struggles
so that you can claim your own path
and make your life a work of art.
Welcome all. This is Brandon and Evan doing another podcast, and we're glad to have you. This is going to be another one. It's going to be another one of these talks, but I think we'll get into some cool stuff here. We're going to talk about leaning into the life that you resist. And we were playing around with that title a little bit, but it kind of works because there's these things that we want in our life, and they scare us and they make us uncomfortable and they're challenging. And we sometimes don't feel like we have what it takes to go into them, or we're scared we're going to lose something. And we want to talk about that because one of the things that Evan and I were discussing was how, like, you know, at some point you've got to put some skin in the game. At some point you got to take a risk. You got to, and I think it really begins with being vulnerable. I think that's the first most important leap that we all got to take. And you just got to lean into vulnerability a little bit. And vulnerability is actually strength when you get to the other side. But it starts from a very kind of this kind of frightening place, uncomfortable place often. And I mean, there's a lot to say about it, so I won't try to give it all away here, but that's essentially the idea we're getting into. And I'm glad you guys are here. What are your thoughts on this one, Evan? Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're going to get into it, you know, as we always do. We're already into it. You know, there's, I find it funny sometimes. There's like, oh yeah, we're going to get into it, and normally we're already like into it as we're talking about it, you know. But from the outset, no, I think this is a really good conversation that's been sort of brought up. There's, you know, like many things we talk about on the show, this one came about as some things that were going on for you. Some things that you were looking at, some things that you were interested in, and a lot of the things you were saying were connecting with certain things that I've been thinking about and that I've been, you know, working on or working through or questioning. I think this is a great subject, not only because it's just, you know, it's kind of hot and fresh for each of us, but I think that also this is a great start of the year kind of a show to do. You know, like early in the new year, you know, talking about the life that we resist, you know, because I think that brings up so many things, the life that we resist, because it implies something that we want, you know, that we maybe are just too afraid of, or that we, for some reason or another, we have a lot of reasons as to why we just can't do that or why we won't do that. But the thing is that it still leaves us with all of these desires, you know, like, and not just small desires like, oh, I'd like to go out for dinner this week or something, you know, like desires that are so big, so massive. They have this life inside of us, and it creates a deep sense of pain that when we don't take any action on it, when we don't allow that space in our lives to actually manifest in some kind of way. And I know I guess I'm going off on a rant right away here, but one of the things that came up before we started recording was, okay, for me, this whole thing of leaning in, because leaning into that life you resist, that can be a very uncomfortable thing to do. So how do we find the strength, the capacity, the thing within us, so that we can move through those things that scare us to go after that life? And for me, I think that begins with a reason that is bigger than ourselves. That begins with, that life is not just about having material things. It's not about status. It's not about external things. It's about something deeply, deeply internal, that is far bigger than just you. And I think that's where, for me, this conversation begins.
I think you asked $1 million question, like, what does it take, or what's that going to, what do I have to do? And I think it's more than an intellectual pursuit. I think that there are certain things that there's an intellectual part to it all. Like, I think that for the most part, I bet if you ask people, like, do you think playing it safe is going to get you what you want in life? Do you think that, taking no risks, and, if you keep your dreams and your vision small enough, then maybe. But I think most people, if you go, well, what do you really want? They realize intellectually, I gotta take some risk. I gotta try. I gotta put myself out there, and they get that. But that's not enough. I don't think that's enough to get someone off their ass, to get them to actually lean into something, to get them to open up to something that they're just not in the habit of doing. And I think that what we're saying is you got to break a pattern, and the pattern is to play it safe, and leaning in breaks the pattern. It's, instead of doing it the way that feels good or feels easy or feels safe, it's about doing it a different way. And sometimes that can be around really simple, small stuff. But I do think that intellectually, the one thing you have to do is you have to accept and you have to agree with that leaning in is actually worth it. Doesn't mean you'll do it, but I think you have to at least accept the premise that you got to lean into it. Like, if you're doing what everyone else does, you're going to get what everyone else gets, kind of thing. And you got to realize that if I lean in a little bit more, if I go for it a little bit more, there might be something on the other side of that territory. And I think that's the key word too, is that there might be, and there might not be. And that's the risk you got to take. You got to be willing to go venture out into that area. And sometimes your efforts are not going to be recognized. They're not going to be noticed. You're going to make a mistake. You're going to get burned. The bad thing is going to happen. And you have to be willing to say intellectually, I understand that could happen, and I'm okay with that. Now, physically and your body, emotionally, all that, psychologically, you haven't made that leap yet. But intellectually, I think you can go, okay, let's imagine I was okay with that if it didn't scare me so much. You know what I mean? And after that, then I think it starts coming down to like more your psychology, your body sensation, your feelings, your emotions, and getting into that nitty gritty stuff. And to give an example before I pass the torch over, is like, sometimes you need to get yourself so excited about what you're going for that you're willing to take the leap. And not getting excited is a practice of safety. So that's a good example of how you're not using that emotion that's necessary for you to do the thing. Because if you get excited enough, you're going to be willing to do things that you wouldn't normally be willing to do. But some people don't let them get themselves excited. And then they're scared that if they get excited, they'll do something stupid, and maybe you will, but you have to be willing to take that risk. You have to be willing to look like an idiot or feel like an idiot, to a lot of time take the leap that you need to take.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a lot to unpack there's a lot to unpack in all of that you just said too. Because something that you had mentioned before was from our favorite philosopher, Alan Watts, was that, like sometimes you will get burned, for stepping out there and taking a chance and showing a level of trust and faith in what you're doing. It's not necessarily a guarantee of things just going absolutely swimmingly or things going the way that you would want them to go. But the cost the other way is, to borrow the word from the title of this episode, you can end up just resisting your life away. You just resist everything until it's gone. And I can't imagine that would leave anything but just a big pool of regret and missed opportunities and things that you wish that you'd done that you didn't. And look, I don't want to come off as being one of those like, you just gotta go and you just gotta do it. I mean, there is some wisdom to that, but believe me, like, to everyone listening to this, like, the person that you're listening to right now is a person who has bowed down to their fear far more often than I would care to admit. It's I understand how crippling fear and anxiety can be in putting yourself out there and taking a chance and doing these things, but it is such a slow, painful death of a life that you're living. You are essentially kind of living a Walking Dead type of existence when you're in that space. And confronting your fears is not an easy thing to do, and especially the fears that come up when it comes to going after a life that truly means something to you. The more it means to you, the more resistance you're going to feel to that thing. Mm-hmm. Which is why, I mean, again, I would say, like, to touch on what you're saying, that passion, that excitement, man, you got to connect with that, because, one of a very old piece of wisdom is that where love is, fear cannot also exist, and vice versa. Mm-hmm. Where fear is, love cannot exist. And so that's where connecting to that passion, connecting to passion and excitement, those are all forms of love. It's love has many sort of accompanying subtleties that come along with it. Passion and excitement are two of those things. Those are reflections of love. And when you can connect to that thing, that is such a great thing that you can use to help push you through the fear. Because when you're riding on that, the fear is going to take a back seat, but there can be a pitfall with that, in the sense that, you're not always going to be riding on that thing. There are days when it is harder than others to get up and do the thing, to put in just a little bit of time to that thing that really means something to you in your life. And for me, that's again where we've got to come down to, it's like, okay, so what is that thing that's bigger than you? And that thing that's bigger than you can definitely be a source of excitement, and it's probably the source of your passion, but it doesn't necessarily have the same sort of burst of, just this explosive burst of energy that comes with it. But it is this, just the beating heart of what you're doing, of what's behind everything that you're doing. So, I mean, again, I think that you've really got to take the time to connect with that thing is that you're doing, and that's bigger than you, because that's going to see you through all of it. It's going to see you through the highs and the lows of everything. It's that place where you come to recenter and that anchoring point for when you get lost, and where you can say, wait, hang on a second, what the fuck is this all about? Like, let's remember what this whole thing is all actually about to get you back on track.
When I hear that bigger than you, what I think of is the image of you, the image you have of yourself. You know, like, why are we scared to look dumb? Why are we scared to look like an idiot, or whatever you want to call it, right? Like, it's because you think that you are something. You think you appear some way. You are somebody, and that's your image, in my opinion. It's your ego. It's this pattern that you have formed of yourself, and you think that's you, and it's not. And you can break that pattern, but I think this is the problem that every human being faces. You live a pattern long enough, you begin to think it's you, and then you're scared to break it. And I think that's where a lot of the fear comes from. Resistance is, I don't want to break the pattern because the pattern's safe. And I'm saying, and I think you're saying the same thing, it's got to be bigger than you. You got to be willing to not look like who you think you are. And you need to realize that, like, hey, like, you know, I've been telling myself I'm good at this thing, but I've never actually tested it. And now I'm testing it, and I'm not as good as I thought I was. And that's part of moving through the discomfort. Like, I work a lot with writers, you know, and writers continually have writer's block and challenges that way. And after working with me, you know, you just don't have it after a while, especially with the techniques. You know, listen, guys, this is somebody who's written over 3,000 days in a row. Okay. I've written 3,000 days in a row, never missed a day, for at least 30 minutes every day at minimum. This is like 8 years, you know, I'm going to go on 10. I'm going to reevaluate if I want to keep doing this every single day, but I've proven to myself that I can write through anything. And some days you're going to write shit. I write terrible. Some days I write masterpiece stuff, and I'm like, oh my God, I got to make this. But it's like, you know, or at least something out of this. The thing is that you got to be willing to test it. You got to be willing to try it out and stumble and fumble and fail. And, you know, and I think that the reality is, you know, you got to put yourself out there. You got to put yourself out there too. And you're going to have people ridicule you. You're going to have people point at you. You're going to have them say, like, oh, you know, they're going to say shit about you. It's not like if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. You're going to deal with haters. You're going to deal with people that are jealous, that have resentment, that have all sorts of shit going on for themselves. And you got to leave that crowd, and you got to step out onto your own, into the spotlight of whatever your vision or dream is. And that, of course, you resist that, because the people who throw rocks always throw rocks from the shadows. They are faceless, anonymous, and they are in their own world losers. And you have to know that even if that rock hurts, that it's being thrown from somebody that has total pattern paralyzation. And then you can kind of have that empathy and understand that, like, you're stepping into your light, you're stepping into whatever's scary for you, is mirroring back to them that they're not. And like, that's leaning into it. Lean into the light, lean into the thing that puts you on stage, or whatever, you know, I'm making a metaphor here, you know, but it's like, you gotta be willing to step up on a stage if you want this thing. Now, I think you have to go and you have to stop worrying about what people think of you, and you have to start finding out who you are outside of what people think of you. And that's part of the psychology. That's where it goes from intellectual to psychological. Now you're like, okay, I don't know who I am. I don't know what I am, but what if I did this? You know, you might not be able to define that, and that's good though, you know, but you'd break whatever the hell it is you're stuck in.
Mm-hmm. There's a few things that I want to touch on there. The first thing is you mentioned, you know, you step out there and you might discover that you have things to learn, you know, that you don't quite have it. And that's absolutely a possibility. And you will definitely discover that you have things to learn. That is never going to be something that changes until the day you die. like learning never stops. But on the flip side of that is you might step out there and discover that you're really good. And that can also be something that's really scary, because if you discover that you're actually really good at this thing that you've been resisting doing, that means that you've really got to give it. That means, and that might mean a change. That might mean you have to give up something that's been comfortable, that's been, this thing that's just been part of the pattern of your life. Something there might have to change, and with that comes uncertainty. But ultimately, I would say that's something worth doing, especially if you find out that you're good. I mean, if you find out you have a lot to learn, there's still no reason. You still might discover that you have a real fire for doing this thing, even if you learn that you have a lot to learn, because that could be the thing that ends up pushing you and fueling you forward. And what else did I want to say to that? Oh no, I lost it.
Well,
that's all right.
Let me add in this while we're on the topic, is that you might find out you're really good at it, but you'll inevitably find out that you have work to do. It doesn't matter. Like, even the most talented, naturally talented people at anything, they eventually, your natural talent runs out, and then the work and the discipline and the effort and the practice and the willingness to push yourself starts to come into play. And, you look at any of the great athletes, for example, Michael Jordan or, Lionel Messi or anybody, you just like Wayne Gretzky, you look at them all, like, yeah, you don't maybe hear it as much with Wayne Gretzky, but you hear the Michael Jordan story, you hear the Lionel Messi story, if you ever look into their stories, right? And it's like, they did have talent, but they had limitations, they had challenges. And if they didn't overcome them, they wouldn't be the superstars they are today. And there's lots of things like that where it's, it's a matter of basically you're going to be good at certain things, and they're going to reach a peak, and then you're going to have to push into that discomfort, And I think, they say a lot of athletes that actually start out not as the best players end up becoming the better players, as opposed to people who come into something who are good naturally. Because sometimes when you come into something and you're just naturally good, you rest on your laurels and then you rely on that. Whereas when somebody comes in and they're not so good at it, but they really want to be, they end up not only working up to the level of everyone who's really good, but they become better because they built that work ethic. And that's not always the case, but that often happens. Mm-hmm. And I think they carry with them a certain amount of humility. I also think that, there's all sorts of things, like you could be really good at something, and then, you can be scared to lose it. And I think sometimes the fear in that respect, the fear that sometimes fear can push you towards the things you want, like an exercise that I like to do with people is I go, okay, well, let's just say you keep doing what you're doing, and in 20 years, you find yourself in the same place. How does that feel? And most people will say that's not good, right? They'll say some form of that's not good. And it's like that feeling that you're feeling right now, about 20 years from now, that feeling can motivate you into whatever it is that you say you're resisting. Because you just think about, 20 years, I'm going to end up in this place I don't want to be. Okay, I'm going to just make the move. I'm going to do the thing, and sometimes, you need it towards motivation, like excitement and passion and all that stuff. And I think you need that. I think that's going to make it sustainable. Because if you don't have that, I don't think it's sustainable. But that fear motivation, I don't want to end up there. I don't want to go down that path. I don't want to do that, can be used to push you in the direction you want to go and get you out of the rut of the pattern that you're stuck in.
Yeah, sometimes like it can be a very useful exercise, because sometimes it can be hard to necessarily say what you want, but sometimes a really terrific exercise is to say, well, what don't you want? Like,
Yeah.
what don't you want in your life? What don't want you want your life to look like? You know, and that can become like, I always am an advocate for like, well, eventually let's arrive to something that's in the positive side of things, of like, okay, like do the exploration of what you don't want, arrive to a place where you can say what you want, you know, like finish in the place of the positive, something that's moving forward as opposed to something that's just avoiding avoiding something. But it can shed a lot of light into you know, it's really interesting. Like, it can shed a lot of light into some of what's really going on for you, which I think is a really big part of this conversation and is a huge part of life, is being able to be really honest with yourself. Be really, you know, not necessarily brutally honest, because it's not about being, you know, hard on yourself, but it's just about seeing yourself with real clarity, you know, like let's just be honest with where you're at. And sometimes going through that exploration, you know, because like one of the first ways I was exposed to this, and I've done this exercise on the podcast before, and it's one that I do with my class, you know, classes and workshops fairly often. But, you know, it's like, well, what do you want? Right. And once you've answered that question, it's like, okay, well, why that? And then you write down your answer, and then, okay, well, why that? Mm-hmm. And you just keep going. You keep asking why that, why that, why that. And I remember the first time I did that exercise, it led me just kind of very naturally to this thing of like, well, I don't want this and I don't want that. And what was kind of startling about that was that what I don't want, a lot of those things looked a lot like how my life looked like. Mm. So it can be something that really poignantly points some things out that, you know, usually we know these things. Usually like some part of us deep down actually knows this. Just like, I know this, and I know I felt this way, and I've been thinking this way in a long time. But, you know, there can be something when you can finally just say it, you know, when it's no longer this secret, you know, this that you're ashamed of, you know, even for yourself, you know, that you're walking around with, to finally say, yeah, you know, like this is where I'm at. And my life looks like a lot of things that I don't want, and like a lot of things that I know that I am not. Mm-hmm. In a way like that. And on some deep level, I know I'm not these things, you know, and that can be very powerful too, because like that can hit on your anger, you know, and anger can be a really good thing if you've been in a rut, you know, like if you're in a rut and you can tap into some anger, holy shit, man, that's great stuff. You know, like that's some fire that can help you make some changes and to take some action and some steps towards something that is really truly you.
Mm-hmm. I think anger is necessary. I actually think it's a necessary part of the whole process. And I don't like that our culture looks at anger in such a negative light. And, you know, we look at anger as this kind of destructive thing. And I think that
if I may, just very quickly, I think that anger is just suppressed and blocked passion.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think, you know, a lot of time, I find that a lot of time anger is the first emotion you experience on the journey of depth into your emotions. You know, anger is a necessary kind of, like, it breaks the dam, you know, and what can come behind that can be very interesting. But sometimes you need the anger to break through something. You need to get fed up with something. And Tony Robbins talks about this, and I think it's a pretty smart comment he made, but he talks about you need to get disgusted. You need to get disgusted with your life. You need to get disgusted with the way you're being. It needs to be disgusting to you. And the moment that you get like, this is gross, I cannot live like this anymore. I cannot, no more. This cannot be, that that frustration, it might feel like, the frustration is just anger. Anger comes in different forms, but anger can be like, I don't want to live in this clutter anymore. I don't want to live in this mess anymore. I don't want to live with these people around me anymore. You know what I mean? And that's what makes you go, and make changes and make leaps and take, bounds. And after you make some decisions with anger, you might find yourself in like, well, I don't want to live in this clutter anymore, but now I got to get rid of shit. And I'm scared to get rid of it because what if I need it, or what if I can sell it? Or I'm scared to lose these friends because, well, what if I'm alone? That the next emotion might be fear. And now you got to go, okay, well, maybe you need it towards motivation now. Maybe the anger got you out of it, but now you need to go like, well, what do I want? There's lots of ways that this stuff happens. And I think my point, just to carry on yours, is that you have to get into the emotion. And I think anger is a great gateway. I don't think that anger needs to be destructive in the sense that you need to go and like punch holes in a wall and hurt people. I think anger can be disgust and frustration and an acknowledgement. Like what's the sensation you feel in your body when you let yourself acknowledge that you're angry, and let that sensation drive you to take action, to make change. And change does not mean you have to destroy, but it might mean you need to get rid of, remove. It might mean that you need to shake up things. It doesn't have to be a destructive emotion, but our culture, because for a whole fucking variety of reasons, we look at anger as like, oh, don't have that. And there's probably sadness. We throw, we have a whole bunch of shit around that one too. And it's like, no, you got to feel sad. You might have to cry it out. I'm just going off, Evan, sorry, but you might have to cry it fucking out. And that is sometimes a huge transition in change. You got to maybe get sad about like certain things, and you let yourself feel that and have that catharsis. And through that, you will come out anew. That can be like a cocooning stage, and you come out of that alive and aware.
Yeah. I mean, and very often, sorry. I had to turn it as I got one of my cats in the background.
Oh yeah, I heard him just subtly.
Oh yeah, he's just going off, loving the sound of his own voice.
Yeah, there he is.
There he is. That's all right. We'll keep doing it. We'll do it live.
Yeah.
But yeah, sometimes very often, like the crying can come after the anger. The anger comes out, and then following close behind is the tears to help wash things out. It's funny, just like as you're saying, like, because sometimes anger is a beautiful catalyst to make a decision, to be decisive about something in your life. It gives very often, in moments of like that anger and that disgust and that kind of hurt, it reaches that boiling point, and you're like, all right, I've got to be decisive about one aspect or another. Just like, because as you were talking about it, this is like, we're usually talking about the bigger things of like our purpose and our path and all of these things, but like on a smaller scale, I was thinking about when I was like 19 or 20, and I was working at this restaurant, and there was this girl there who I liked, and we had sort of like gone on some dates, and like we were just sort of playing around with the idea of seeing each other and messaging each other and things like that. And I just remember, like, it was one of these things where, I was putting out kind of like effort to, spend time with her, to, just kind of surprise her at work, just like pop in when I wasn't there and stuff like that. And just kind of not really getting anything back. And this went on for probably a couple of months, and I remember one night I was coming back from acting class that we were in together. and I was on the train, and at one point on the train while I'm on my way home, I could I could see the restaurant that I worked at. And so as I would go around, like so many weeks before, I would look out the window and I would see if her car was parked outside. And it's like, and if I saw that her car was parked outside, then I would pop in and say hello, right? And so this one particular night, I'm looking out the window and I was like, oh, I wonder if her car's out there and if she's working. And it was just like this thing just hit me where I was just like, I feel so stupid right now. Like I was just so angry and disgusted with myself. It's just like, I was like, what the hell am I doing right now? Like, what am I doing? What am I putting myself into this thing for when like I'm getting like, there's no sort of return of like, I don't even know if she's actually even all that interested in me. You know, like it was actually this thing of clarity. It's like, I don't even know. Or if this is just like a little bit of sort of like flirtatious fun for her. I have no idea. But in that moment, I was just like, I'm done. Like, this is like, I'm not putting any more into this. And I remember just kind of like in this sort of triumphant way, like walking back home, like from there, I'm like, I'm not stopping in and blah, blah, blah. But it was like, you know, it's interesting how just that anger and that disgust can bring so much clarity into your life to make a decision.
Yeah, it's self-respect. You know, that's like, I mean, to me, that's a big part of what happened there. You know, you looked at that and you went, you know what? I'm not being appreciated. You know, these things that I'm doing aren't being acknowledged, and I'm done. I'm done with that. You know, and, you know, I bet if she would have said, I really missed you for, you know, I was hoping to see you, or she did something, you might've been, okay, you know what? But in a certain way, making that decision would have broke that parallel. And that's the thing about leaning into something. When you lean into it, sometimes what happens is you get the thing you're scared of. Like you might find out, hey, this person actually they're not into me. And I don't want to find that out. That's why we maintain this bullshit, you know, pattern, which is look for a car, go see her and all this stuff. But like, that's a great example of breaking a pattern. You had a pattern and then, you know what, you had this moment, you stepped into your self-respect, you stepped into all that and you got the answer. It's not there. And that can be an uncomfortable feeling to find out, but that's the thing that people don't always want to find out. Like I worked over the last couple of years, I've worked a couple regular jobs. And it's been interesting because most of my life, I was just an artist doing my artist thing. And so it's been interesting, but the last company I worked for, you know, I really leaned into it. I'm like, I'm going to be the best fucking employee they've ever seen. And I was, and I just started to realize, you know, after I think I worked with them for maybe a year, I started to realize that the people that were working with me, they respected me, they appreciated me, but the company in itself just did not seem to value the fact that I was bringing this. And I'm not patting myself on the back here. I mean, I had people talking me up who were in my circle, but it's like, you know, I was talking to them at the head office and I'm just like, okay, well, you know, I have these skills and whatever. And, you know, I feel like, you know, whatever. I don't want to get into details, but I had to leave that company. And I just got to the point and I found out that they were I didn't agree with their business practices. And I got to the point where I'm like, I'm fucking done. I'm done. Now it's just a matter of when. And I was like ready to leave that day. And, you know, I work for another company now because I did leave them. And that was the changing moment. And with this company, it's interesting because I said, well, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to lean into it. I'm the best fucking employee I can. Within 6 months, promotion, acknowledgement. I get brought into the office, pat on the back. You're doing a great job. You know, the people who are at the top want to hear from me. They want to hear my thoughts. They want to know my input. They want to know how they can help me do more of what I'm doing. It's a totally different experience. Now, same behavior, different environment. If I didn't change environments, I'd never get the acknowledgement that I'm getting now. And this is part of leaning in. Leaning in helps you find out the answer that you're scared to get. you know, and sometimes it helps you get the answer that you're actually looking for. So in this case, the new place, I'm getting the answers I'm looking for. In the old place, I was getting the answers I didn't want to find out. But either way, you benefit by leaning in. It's just sometimes, I mean, it sucks to be like, I fucking invested a year in this stupid company, and I'm not going to have anything to really show for it, you know?
Yeah. Well,
but
I think it's interesting because, you know, it points to the fact that very often, you know, that thing that we're avoiding is really just something that we've made about ourselves. We've made it mean something about ourselves. Like, why was I, you know, pursuing this girl who, you know, had questionable interest in me? You know, why were you putting up, you know, with this behavior at a workplace? You know, these are, and I mean, I'll just speak for myself, but, you know, for me, it was just like avoiding that sense of being rejected.
mm-hmm.
You know, that maybe I just wasn't as important, you know, to this person as they were to me. You know, like there's this whole, but what I find so remarkable is that when you reach that point of absolute anger and disgust and whatever it is, that clarity, maybe we'll just call it clarity. When you reach that point of clarity, it was like that sense of self-worth wasn't even in question, you know, when that clarity arrived, you know, because it was a clarity of, I deserve better than this, and I'm worth more than this, and I have more self-respect than this. Not
Mm-hmm.
that I'm saying that because like this person, I don't think this person was being cruel or trying to be cruel, or that was their intention in any way, shape, or form. But it had everything entirely to do with myself, right? And in many ways, we could say that, you know, I was projecting a lot of things onto her as to, you know, trying to make her something for me. Like she was supposed to give me value in some way. Like if she likes me, it makes me better somehow. But in a weird way, by kind of coming to a place where I'm like, well, they might not want me. And then being able to kind of rise above that, to realize there's a capacity above me that's just not afraid of that. You know, that's a far more powerful thing to come into contact with. And I think that that's something that, again, comes down to that, yeah, like when you lean into something, when you lean into the reality of what's going on, the reality of your truth, the reality of what you're feeling and what you're sensing, you know, I think that that's where we find a tremendous capacity to transcend what we were before and to grow.
I think, you know, there's some interesting things with the story you're sharing. Like you leaned in giving her a chance too. Like you leaned in by going out of your way to go see her. And like, there's so many people, men and women, who would so appreciate that if someone did that, you know what I mean? And the thing is that sometimes people go and do that, and it's just, for whatever reason, it's not the right mix. It's not the right chemistry. And, you know, a lot of time I find with, you know, particularly with romantic relationships, it's usually one person's into it, the other person isn't. And finding both people that are into it comes with the next challenge of, are you even compatible once you both decide you're actually into each other, you know? So, you know, you're still at stage one. It's like, okay, so maybe that dynamic with you two isn't going to work, but you find that out because you made that extra effort. You leaned in, you took a risk. I mean, you stopped, you know, you put yourself out there, you made yourself vulnerable, and being vulnerable and then getting the answer you don't want to get is hard. Right. And that's why we don't do it. I think that, you know, I think you said something else I just want to mention. You said, I think you said, I feel like foolish or like an idiot or whatever. And like, I mean, I totally relate to that because with the job too, I felt like that. I was like, why did I spend extra time here? I could have like left and gone to a different company already. And, you know, it was like, you know, you said something before we started recording. It's like, that's how long it took you to learn that lesson. That's how much you had to try. That's how much you had to lean into it to figure that out. And I think that's the thing is like, we shouldn't look at ourselves as fools or idiots or anything like that. And like none of us, and including our audience and everybody, it's like, that's what it takes for you to learn. That's what it took for you. It's not a waste of time. That's how much effort you had to put in. And I think that two things. I think you need to lean into things as much as you can. I think you need to like really push yourself out of that comfort zone. But I also think that there's a certain time and place, and I don't think that I think we do this too much, but I do think there's a time and a place to play it cool. I think there's a time and a place to not be so attentive to stuff, to relax a little, let it unfold, watch it happen, like give it some room to breathe. And, relationships are like this. You need to let them, sometimes you can crowd someone too much. You can, and sometimes with wanting something, like wanting a job or wanting whatever, like you gotta let it, and that's why it takes time. Because if you just put everything on the table all the time, it would be weird. And there's something to always acknowledge. There's a social element that we're all playing. If you just become 100% in everything you do, like always just say how you feel, just like it's too much. It'll scare people away. It will close doors. There's a certain amount of, you need to be willing to put yourself out there, but there's a certain amount of, you need to assess, do I actually need to share this? Do I need to say this? Do I need to do this? And that's where I say, like, we probably do that too much. But I think as we're kind of talking about this, I think it's important to mention, just because you got to lean into something doesn't mean that you have to always lean in with everything. Sometimes leaning in is just give it a 10% boost, give it a little bit more. You don't have to put 100% into it, but give it a little push. Let's just see, does it have any give? And if it does, maybe give it a 20% push, gradual. Like I think going from 0 to 100 too quickly is just, it's a bad move in a lot of scenarios.
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely agree. Like, it can definitely be, you want to lean, into a level of discomfort that you can manage.
Yes.
That's just like I'm uncomfortable, but I can handle this. I can handle this. Like it's not necessarily easy, but you can do it. And then once you push into that, and then it's like, oh, okay. And then you can push a little more, and you can push a little more. And, that's a good sweet spot to be in, because if you lean too heavily, like it can be really disastrous. Like, I mean, just look at the Fire Festival.
Oh yeah, totally.
Those are guys who leaned way too much.
Well, and that's the gambler's problem, right? Is you invest and then you reinvest and you reinvest, and sometimes you got to cut your losses. That's part of like lean in a little, and then you assess, like, do I get the fuck out of here because this is like, I'm in, and just take my losses and cut your losses. Like I was in a relationship I've talked about in the past. I'm not getting into details right now, but I was in a relationship where I just kept reinvesting. It's like put more and more. And I walked away from that and I was like, what a fucking idiot I am. Like that was so bad. That was a dumb move. But that's what it took for me to learn. But the thing is that there is a certain point where you have to go, okay, I'm leaning in here and I'm not getting back enough. And that's where you just got to go, I've invested this time, this money, this effort, this energy, this resources, whatever. And you got to say, fucking cut the losses and walk away. A bad, unhealthy, abusive relationship, something like that, that's one where you got to walk away. This actually, I realize, is a really important part of the conversation, because leaning in sometimes means that you get the information you don't want. And it tells you, I got to cut my fucking losses and walk. And that's friendships, relationships, a job you've been working your whole life, all sorts of shit.
Well, because it's like a realization that whatever you're doing or the way that you're doing it is not the thing that you want.
Yes.
And that's just sort of feedback. That's feedback to something, and it's like, okay, you take a different tack and you lean into something else. And I think it's kind of interesting that the conversation has taken this direction where we're exploring the fact that leaning into something that is something that maybe you were resisting, that's something that you wanted to go for, it does not necessarily pan out in a good way, and you can put a lot into something, but then you're going to get the response to tell you, because then the whole thing is always shifting and the whole thing is always moving, because you'll be leaning into this thing, and eventually at some point you can realize that now that's become a destructive, comfortable thing. Like you push into this, and now it's become the thing that's safe, the thing that's comfortable, and you're stuck again.
Yeah, and you're scared to lose what you've invested.
And you're scared to lose into that thing, but there's some other thing that you are now resisting.
Yeah.
There's a thing that you are now resisting in a different direction, and now you've got to lean into that thing. Like I think that it's always important to say, but like there's never a finished point, and I think that that's something that can't be said often enough in our culture, because we're so indoctrinated into this idea of arriving upon some everlasting sunny day in our lives. And that we can just put our feet up and that's it, and it's all done. It's all finished. And it's like that doesn't exist, and you don't even actually want that. Like that. That's a whole other rabbit hole to go on, but yeah, you don't actually want that. We need to have the change and new things and continuing to explore the things that excite us. And I think that that's the beautiful part of it, is like you get to just continue to follow what excites you. It's so simple, but so hard to follow in a very strange, bizarre way.
I think also, when you go towards something, you lean into it and it works, that you will inevitably change from the thing you're leaning into. Like for example, the film industry. When I started in the film industry, I was like 16. And to me, the idea of even being in the same room as a movie star was like, oh my God, a movie star. You know what I mean? Like it was such a big thing. And cut to a few years later, I was in class with movie stars. I was hanging out, going for lunch with movie stars. It's like, these are people who I'm just having a real conversation like this, maybe not in this much depth, but, basically this idea, right? And it's like, holy shit. And, I guess 4, 5, 6, 7 years later, like that stuff started to become more of a reality. And, who you were whenever you start your journey is not who you're going to become, because, and you're not either of those people. You're not like, I'm not the 16-year-old and I'm not the person I am now, because it's always evolving and always changing. But I think what happens with people is we get to a place and we're like, I like where I'm at. And then they try to keep that alive. They try to keep that. And the thing is there's one constant in the world, and it's change. Change is inevitable. And I think that, not always, and it's not 100% the case, but I think a lot of time people get divorced or things end, like friendships and relationships, because people are refusing to change together. And to bring this back around, we were talking about the leaning, like lean 10%. I'm sure that you could probably comment on this even more than me, but it's like in a relationship, if you just decided 100% we're doing this all of a sudden, you would like destroy everything, because you're with a partner, you're with a teammate. And you got to lean a little bit together. You got to kind of you got to navigate it together. I know that, our friendship, you and me, like I've noticed that you've helped me keep my leaning in balance. Like when we started recording, like very first podcast ever, I was of the mindset of like, I need to sell people. Like I used to think like that. I used to think I need to sell someone on the shit that I have. Now I sell them, like sell them into it. Now I'm more like, I talk them out of it. I'm like, look, you got to have passion. You got to have commitment. You got to have desire. You got to have some money. You got to have some things. You have those things. Because if you don't, then we're not even like, it's not even going to work. You know what I mean? Like you got to have time. You got to have something. And like, and I just, because I think that's the thing. When you start something, you kind of come from a place of, there's a sense of scarcity, right? That's the fear. Like, I don't know if I'll have what I want. Like if I leave this person, I don't know if I'll have the other relationship. I might be alone, right? It's that scarcity. That's the change. If I leave these friends or this group or this job, I might not have whatever I think I need to have. That's, I think, the first stage. And I think what later comes is when you actually lean into something, you gain abundance. And when you gain abundance, because you actually went towards something you wanted, those fears aren't there anymore. You're not scared of the same things you were scared of. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, I'm not scared now of not getting clients. You know what I mean? Like, I remember when I first did my movie course, and I know I'm going off, man, I'm sorry, but I didn't even know if people would pay me $1. You know what I mean? Like, I don't even know if anyone will even give me any money to do this. Like, this is like, who am I to do this shit? You know what I mean? Now it's like, it's not even an issue, but like there was a time where I didn't even think people would even pay me. You know what I mean? And it's like, we all go through that, and that's, and then you got to go and I tried it and I did it and it worked. And some people made movies and some people won awards. And then, and that helped me go, oh shit, okay, maybe I do have something and that was something that I went, okay, I can help people. And then, what happens is you like start to realize, hey, like what I was scared of, I don't need to be scared of, but then new fears, bigger fears, different fears, they come in and you got to lean into those,
Yeah.
Like I could go on, but you get my point, right?
I get the point. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing. Sometimes occasionally you lean in 100%, you give it your all. There are those occasional moments where you just got to make a fucking change. You got to go for it. You got to give it everything you got. But I think 90% of the time it's 10%, 20%, 30%. It's a gradual lean and you let time take its course and you lean a little more and you lean a little more. You don't have to do it all day one. Occasionally though, you got to fucking leap off the plane and just go for whatever it is you're going to go for. But I don't think that's always the case. I just think that's actually kind of rare.
And and usually that time and place presents itself.
Yes.
Like, cause like there's the lean, and then, and then every now and then there's the moment where it's like jump,
It's the leap. The leap. Yeah. Yeah. That's another conversation. Leap into the life you want. That's like when you've hit your wit's end. You're like, I have to change and nothing can stay the same anymore. It's gone too far. That's drastic, right?
Yeah.
I just don't think it has to be so drastic. That's
I agree. I was also just thinking, I'm like, what was that? Like, it was a book somebody put out, but it was like jab, jab, jab. Hook or something like that.
Gary Gary V.
Was that Gary V?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was just thinking like that in terms of like lean, leap.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
lean, 4 leans and then a leap.
Yeah, a couple of leans and then you can leap.
Yeah.
Don't leap first.
Yeah.
Well, let's tell me. I'm not drinking anything for the month of January. I'm doing a bit of a cleanse of a number of things, including alcohol. But Brandon, you've got something you're consuming.
I do have a beer. So
I'm living vicariously through you.
Live it. So I don't know if we've ever had this one before. I don't remember, but it's solid. It's Vancouver Island Brewing. And it's the Victoria Pilsner. Nice and light and tasty. And I don't know if you can even see that if you're on video, but whatever. This is a solid beer. This is, I just wanted something light and nice, and it's a goodie. So I say do it.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, do we
Well,
have anything else to say?
just some wrap up thoughts, I suppose. I mean, I think the thing that I want to kind of just, make sure that gets reiterated is that this for this to work, if you're listening to this conversation, you're like, yeah, I need to lean into this. It's not an intellectual thing. It's an emotional thing. You got to get to the emotional core of whatever the hell that is. And that might be anger for you, might be what breaks the dam. You might find you feel sadness because you didn't do it sooner, or for a variety of other reasons. You might feel fear because you're worried you're going to lose some shit. You got to feel all of those emotions. You got to process them. It's going to be like grief in some ways because you're leaving the life behind that you think you're attached to for the one that you truly want. But I think that at the end of the day, no matter what, you gotta get connected to your passion and your excitement and your joy and that little kid in you that just wants to fucking do it and go for it and try it. And, I think that wanting to want that is a good start. I think that you gotta just, in the way I do it now, because I was someone who avoided my emotions and body feelings for like most of my life. What I do is when I try to tap into my emotions, a lot of the time what I'll do is I'll just sit with myself in silence and I'll go, what does this feel like in my body? Like, does it feel warm? Does it feel cold? Does it feel sharp? Where do I feel it? Do I feel it in my heart, my stomach, my balls? Like, where do I feel this shit? You know what I mean? Yeah. And having a sense of bodiness to this is what's going to help you lean, So intellectually, if you're on board and this makes sense to you, that's the first step. Next step, now you got to emotionalize it. You got to get connected. And then you're going to actually have the energy in emotion, right? You're going to have the thing you need to actually do something, and just lean a little. Don't worry about this. Doesn't have to be like 100%. Just lean a little into whatever it is that you think you want to do. And that will help you. And then you can lean a little more and lean a little more and lean a little more. And then pretty soon, that fucking thing's going to tip and you're going to be through the other side. And hey, there you go. That's nice. My thought. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think to recap for me, like, I think maybe the most practical aspect of this, at least for myself, is about being really honest with ourselves, with where we're at, how we feel, and the thing that we want. What do we really want? Use any of the many tools out there that people presented. If money were no object, or like if that sort of situation, what would you do with your life? Like if everything that if whatever you did would just be wholly, completely accepted by the world, what would you do? Ask that question. And maybe again, ask that, why that, till you've gone to your absolute core, cause that's gonna say something about not only what you truly want, but what it'll get you in the ballpark of what you have to give. And also what any of your, however you express yourself, whatever that takes the form of, it's going to tell you where that comes from. Like as artists, I one of my acting teachers used to say, acting doesn't fuel your acting, life fuels your acting. And I don't see much of a difference for anybody out there. What are you passionate about? What do you want to do? What do you feel that pull to do in your life? Whatever that thing is just the expression of something even bigger that you have inside of you. And be honest with yourself and find out what that thing is, because it's imperative that you do.
There's something else I want to just mention, just to cap this off. And I think
away.
You might like this. because you talked about early on, and I don't want to let this kind of escape at the end of the conversation because I feel like you raised a really, really important point. You said that it needs to be bigger than you. And I really think that, I mean, it might not have been what you meant, but I really hear it as it needs to be more than your image or more than your ego, whoever you think you are. You know, this passion inside you is more than that thing you're locked into. And one of our favorite philosophers, Alan Watts, has a quote, and I actually got another quote. I'm going to read them both, but Alan Watts comes first because they lead into each other very nicely. Alan Watts said, "The you who you think you are does not exist." That's the first thing to keep in mind, because you made that up. And D.H. Lawrence said this one, and I think this is the perfect way to end this podcast. Perhaps you're a slave to your own idea of yourself.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you got something out of this, if you feel it improved your life or your journey in any way, please take a moment to subscribe, leave a review, or share the episode.
You can also support us on Patreon, where we have tons of great bonuses. You are the ones that make the show possible and help us to thrive. Thank you for joining us.